Hi class, it's Phyllis again, and it's August 10th, 2017. It is 102 degrees here in Eastern Washington, and I am reading this book this week, and I suggest you guys go out and get it because it's pretty awesome. So enough of that. I was put into the negative group, and I will be discussing negative aspects of power use in healthcare. I will be discussing the different powers in organizations, as well as Mitzenberg's political game playing framework and examples of those things. So let's get going. No matter where you work in the country, healthcare is a science, so it's pretty standardized wherever you go. You're going to have physicians, nurses, caregivers, social services. In hospital settings, you'll have respiratory therapists, you'll have discharge planners. It's pretty standardized. With that said, there are different power roles within these organizations that come up, and it's best if we recognize them and understand how to deal with them so that we can be better leaders as we go forward in our careers. According to our text, French and Raven, 1959, defined power in terms of psychological relationships in which influence can change individual perceptions and behaviors. The psychological relationship that we encounter in the workplace can range from positive to very negative. Recognizing and understanding these types of power seen in organizations, how they impact the organization or group, is necessary as we go forward in our career. So let's get started. There are several individual bases for social power within healthcare. Different dynamics play out each day. Understanding power and how it's used will allow us as individuals to be better leaders and interpreters of these powers. So the first one I want to go over is coercive power. We can tell by the name that it's negative. So coercive power refers to power obtained through a dependent relationship. The agent of power is perceived as somebody who is threatening or has power to make your work life harder or terminate your employment. So the receiver, the recipient, sees this agent as someone who could negatively impact their job. So there's fear there. This leads to an imbalance in power and leaves the recipient afraid to question or go against anything the agent says or does. In healthcare, I think this can be dangerous because you have to kind of think for yourself and you have to question things at times when they don't make sense. So I'm going to use the nurse-caregiver relationship for this example. I believe the textbooks use doctor-nurse relationship. So nurse-caregiver relationship. The nurse is a supervisor. She's supervising the aides. She determines their schedule. She determines their location of where they work in the department. She determines their breaks, that sort of thing. So the aide could see this person as someone with power to impact their job. If the nurse is someone who uses coercive power, they may ask, for instance, the aide to do their wound care for them. And the aide may not question this because they are afraid of what might happen if they do. So that's how coercive power works. The caregiver perceives that the nurse has power as her supervisor. She does not question her and goes ahead with the wound care, even though it's beyond her scope of practice and she knows it's wrong. She does this out of perceived fear of what the nurse might do if she doesn't comply. So this is an abuse of power, one that needs to be stopped if it's recognized or seen in the workplace. Our second power is a legitimate power, and legitimate power comes from perceived social or cultural norms in society. So, An example of this would be when I graduated from nursing school, I had the idea in my head that physicians were superhuman. They were healers. They were all-knowing. They were these, just people that had done all this work to get where they were, and they shouldn't be questioned. After I started working as a nurse and observing physicians in my experience, I realized that they're human beings and they make mistakes just like we do. And there's gaps in their knowledge just like there's gaps in my knowledge. So that legitimate power, just from being a physician, that kind of went away. And I base my opinion on how the physician works and how the physician acts and how they practice instead of just based on their title. So, however, individuals who perceive legitimate power may not have the ability or the courage to question a physician's request. So say I hadn't evolved and realized that physicians are humans and they do make mistakes. Say I still felt like physicians were all-knowing and couldn't do anything wrong, they were gods. If a physician told me to give someone a prescription of medication that I know is incorrect or that they're allergic to or whatever, and I perceived that this physician was all-knowing, I wouldn't question that order and I'd just go ahead and do it despite the fact that it is wrong and could potentially kill the patient. This is where legitimate power can be a negative and can be dangerous. The third power is referent power. This is derived through personality and leadership charisma. The agent of power is perceived by the recipients as a person of leadership, quality, and likability. This type of referent power creates a desire to please the agent out of genuine respect and admiration. So this type of power, I think, comes from just being a good manager. Talking to your staff, finding out what their needs are, finding out what the problems are on the floor, finding out how to make their jobs easier. These are all ways that you can make your staff happier, and that results in them wanting to please you and admiring you as a leader. So that is a good trait. I don't really know how that could be used negatively. I can't think of a way. The fourth power is expert power, and this kind of goes along with legitimate power. Again, the recipient's perception of the agent's knowledge and expertise on a subject is what this is based on. So I'm going to use a psychologist and a patient as an example for this one. So expert power, the patient goes in to see a psychologist. The psychologist says, you have a fear of heights, and I think to cure this fear of heights, you should jump out of a plane. The patient doesn't question this at all because they're talking to an expert. Why would they question it? This person must be right. They don't take into consideration that jumping out of a plane is extreme, could be dangerous, they could die. None of those things come into their thoughts because they just go off of the expert's knowledge and they don't question the expert at all. Again, dangerous. Yeah. So we want to question authority. I think we're taught at a young age not to, but I think it's important that we do throughout our careers. Not in a rebellious way or in a negative, always have the devil's advocate on your side. More so in a inquisitive and getting to know more information, learning from, not understanding. I think that's important. So yeah, expert power is a double-edged sword. It can be dangerous. Reward power refers to power derived from providing rewards to recipients for changing their opinion or behavior to receive the reward or recognition. So this is only possible if the agent of power is offering rewards within their scope of practice. So this is a system that I used pretty commonly as a director of nursing. I have all these shifts to schedule, and I have to get them covered, and I only have so many staff that are willing to work. So offering gift cards, offering money, offering extra days off so that shifts will be worked so that the floor is covered and the residents are taken care of was something that was common practice as a director. In our area, we have a very low pool of people to work from. Eastern Washington doesn't have a lot of nurses or caregivers to pull from. We have a lot of turnover. We have a lot of people that get into the healthcare field and then realize it's not for them, so they leave. So just a lot of change, a lot of turnover. So you've got to be willing to negotiate with your staff to get the floor covered and get the residents cared for. So that was a common practice that I used, reward power. It could be negative, it could be positive. You know, if you're constantly rewarding the same people, it could be because they're the only ones that are stepping up and offering to help. But this could also be seen as favoritism if people outside of that circle don't understand what's going on. So it's important that you do it with the understanding that it's being done to help the organization and the residents. Structural power deals with who has the power to do what within the organization. So there are three types of structural power. The first one is resource power. This is the power to obtain resources to get jobs done. So the administrator would have this type of power, the nursing director would have this type of power, the business office director. You know, usually department heads have resource power. They can order things that they need for their departments up to a certain level. Then there's a cost cutoff where you have to get permission for anything above, and that goes through the administration in the building and organization. So resource power is a leader that can get the resources that are needed, and therefore they have power. Let's see. Decision power refers to the leader who has authority to make bigger decisions within the organization. This is also department heads. Maybe they can make staffing decisions. They can make departmental decisions, not really policy and procedure decisions. That's kind of done on a higher level. Those people are more the regional staff that make those bigger decisions. But the decision makers have power because they are the ones that facilitate change. And the third power is structural power. Sorry, it's informational power. So informational power is the power of information. And as we know, information is power. And those who have it have the power, basically. The power depends on how valuable the information is that the leader holds. So if we're talking about a structural or corporate change, that's a lot of power. If we're talking about someone leaving the organization, it's not so much power. It may be for someone who wants to slide into the role, but other than that, that's not really a power role. So I will move on to the negative impacts on organizations when its members exercise power and play political games within Mitzenberg's political game playing framework. I'm going to give examples and some of my personal experiences with this sort of thing. I found this section really interesting. I've been in healthcare for 17 years, all different settings. So I've seen these political game playing and these behaviors a lot in different settings, mostly in long-term care, but they're present in all settings, including hospitals. one of the reasons I'm leaving nursing is because of the politics and the games played amongst clinical staff. And that's sad that it's that way, but unfortunately I have grown past it, and I want something different in my life. So that is why I'm pursuing this career. There's a saying that I was told in nursing school: nurses eat their young, a known source. I have witnessed countless new graduates come and go in different settings because they were either bullied by older, more experienced nurses or made to feel inadequate or incompetent by their peers. Issues like insurgency are common in long-term care settings where staff develop the us against them thinking atmosphere. A negative reaction to this type of behavior would be to launch a counterinsurgency. The management would see this problem arising and they would put their own insurgency in place to try to stop it. But this isn't the way to handle that situation. Oftentimes, when the resistant group develops, it's best to deal with them directly and immediately. Rather than building up a wall, you want to meet with them directly. This lets them know that you're aware of the resistance and the key players involved in the resistance. But it also lets them know that you're interested in resolving this resistance and working together to create a better work environment. And that's important. Does this mean more training for new nurses when they're hired? Possibly. Or does this mean behavioral counseling and disciplinary action for the nurses that are bullying the new nurses? This is a possibility too. Maybe both things need to be done. You need to look at the big picture. Is it an education problem? Is it a skills problem? Is it an environmental problem, a social problem? That's where examining the whole picture comes in. Another example of negative behavior within Mitzenberg's political game playing is alliances. Building alliances and the Young Turks. I have seen both of these behaviors in almost every long-term care setting that I have ever worked in, to one extent or another. Our text refers to these behaviors as alliance building, leaders building power through peer networks. Hospital department heads form coalitions and establish norms for mutual support and cooperation. Young Turks is described as employees of junior leaders attempting to buy the company or take over its leadership. Hospital nursing management demanding replacement of long-tenured and directional director of nursing. So for instance, what they're saying is Young Turks would be a group of young employees that have decided that the nursing director's been here too long, she's stagnant, she's not making any changes, we need to get rid of her. They get this mindset going, and it builds and it builds and it builds, and then they run the director of nursing out. This is negative. This is a negative workplace, negative atmosphere. This is not okay. Alliance building is people talking amongst themselves, building these alliances, usually against another fraction within the organization. This isn't okay either. It's negative. It puts team members against team members. It doesn't work. So it's imperative that when these types of behaviors arise, they are managed and monitored closely to prevent negative outcomes from arising. You can't stop peers from talking. You can't stop them from hanging out with each other, having relationships. You can, however, recognize when these alliances take a destructive or negative turn and begin to impact the function within the department. So it's important to just kind of keep an eye out for these alliances developing, first of all, and allowing them to achieve a power that they could actually have a negative impact on the organization. Let's see. In my last role as director of nursing in an assisted living, after 3 months of digging through paperwork that was long overdue and out of compliance, I began to focus on the department and its relationship with other departments, because I had witnessed and observed, heard through the grapevine, there was a lot of conflict between the departments, and it had been that way for several years. I dare to say up to 20 years, because there were some employees that had been there that long. I found that there was a subgroup of young Turks who worked for the company for years but were not stellar employees. They had formed alliances and were purposely sabotaging clinical staff. This had been going on for years, and nothing had ever been done to address it. Staff had been permitted to hijack the power of the administrative leaders, and no one was in charge. This is a dangerous situation to be in. The state was in this building twice a week, based on resident complaints, family complaints, staff complaints, everything you could imagine. It was obvious they had major leadership and supervisory problems. At one point, one of the kitchen staff persons called one of our brand new caregivers a stupid bee because she didn't know where to put the dirty dishes. And this was on her first day of work. She ended up giving her notice and quitting that same night. It was a terrible situation, and one that I chose to remove myself from. I resigned from that position after several attempts to remedy the negative behaviors, to no avail, and with no support from my regional staff. So that being said, I walked into a culture that had been allowed to fester for decades. Negative behaviors had been allowed to, well, they were accepted as the norm. And when you have that level of resistance, it's difficult to get past it as only one person, trying to make a change. So that was my experience. Managers are especially responsible for the behavior of their staff and the influence their staff have on other staff. According to the article, when employees stop talking and start fighting, the detrimental effects of pseudo-voice in organization, corporate psychopathic managers can be described as managers who have no conscience and no ability to feel empathy or commitment for those who report to them. These managers are often stars of the company because they get results. They create the illusion of democracy because they want to keep the appearance of the successful popular manager, and democratic leadership style fits that. However, for corporate psychopaths, there is nothing they won't do and no one they won't exploit to get what they want. This is a quote from that article. These people are deceivers, basically. They rise to power because they're good at deceiving, but they're awful to work for. I've had a couple of managers that have been, I believe, fall into this category. These people tend to throw their peers under the bus. They tend to self-exaggerate how much they've done to their bosses. They tend to have difficulty with communication with their peers because they don't listen and they don't take into account anything their peers say, so they're difficult to get along with. But they tend to be successful because they are cutthroat, unfortunately. Another manager type that is negative and has a negative impact on employees is the Machiavellian manager, which can be described as manipulative and who wants to win at any and all costs. The article goes on to describe the nature of the Machiavellian's management style. Machiavellians may encourage employees to voice their opinion, as they tend to say things that others want to hear, and often use impression management tactics to create favorable image. However, they are in fact mainly concerned with their personal agendas rather than the common good. There must be some balance. These are just two examples of negative management. I think as new administrators going out into the world, we have to find some balance that fits us. Extremes are bad in any business situation. They run off valuable employees. They run off clients. You don't want extreme behavior because it's a red flag, basically, when people walk in and see that. So as a new healthcare administrator, I think it's important that we find a happy and healthy managerial style that suits us and that fits the situation we're in for ourselves, not only to produce positive results, but to also produce positive employees. So that is my discussion post for this week. I look forward to listening to all of yours. Have a wonderful day, and thanks.